Hello, everyone. How's it going? The day has come. We finally get to have numbers. We get to have details. We get to know things. Am I expecting a lot of games to be shown off? No. This was intended for GDC, but what I do expect are some hard numbers, some actual facts, some sort of explanation why multiple people in the industry have called this the most exciting hardware, the most exciting new hardware in 20 years. That is a confounding statement that has been racking my brain for the last day straight. I expect to know why. And I expect to see some custom tailored tech demos, whether it's a new game or just a bespoke demo, to sort of show off the capabilities here. And you know what? That's good enough for me. That's good enough for me. How's everyone? Everyone doing all right? I'm going to have the video itself, as you can see, set up right here. We're going to try to do the PS or the YouTube version. And then if that doesn't work out, we'll then switch over to Twitch. Because I know YouTube has HDCP stuff, and I doubt the uploader gets to choose whether or not it cares. So if we see YouTube shit its pants and not work, which we're gonna test with the GigaBoots video real quick. Make sure we're gonna get something. You're all gonna see my recommendations. Oh no. We have to use the GigaBoots video though, because I don't want it to get claimed. Let's do GigaBoots. Sure, armchair. That's a good one. A podcast won't get us claimed. Welcome to Armchair Devs. Kiwami. As you know. Okay, cool. Looks like it's you guys are able to hear it at very least on that video. I'm very, very excited. I cannot stress how excited I am. Azalea Quill asks, what one word would make me scream in joy? Full. I know this is like 2 to 3 words. Full PlayStation compatibility. If they came out and they were like PSP games in 4K, I would be sold immediately. As I described to Bob, there is an argument to be made that the PSP has a better library than the Xbox One when it comes to exclusives. Dissidia Duodecim is an incredible game. I would gladly play it through again in 4K. Gladly do that. By the way, thank you for the subscription. Let me go back to see who that was. Got to go on over to Streamlabs. By the way, I've turned off the sounds for the notifications so that way people can hear everything clearly. Don't want stuff to get cluttered and weird. When he says the PS5 runs at 6 gigahertz, I want to make sure everyone hears that super clearly. Crystal clear. I've mentioned on Twitter before. Oh, that was Airrock resubscribing. Thank you, Airrock. Thank you very much. And thank you for the host, Jacob. Oh, thank you, Twisted Sin. So one of the things that I think would be radical is if they could, because it's been mentioned that the cooling solution for the PS5 is much more intense than before, and if you look at the dev kit, it clearly is. If they found some way to do an absolute incredible... You're right, I should put that on the thing up here. I'll do that while I talk. If they found some way to do a pretty radical overclock of the CPU, that'd be good. Here's what we're gonna do. Take him. Flip him horizontal. Oh no! Now he's anti-PlayStation. Oh, whatever. People won't notice. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. We'll just here we go. Stick that below the chat so you guys can be heard. There we go. Oh, thanks for the follow. But yeah, I've rewatched the Digital Foundry video on the Xbox Series X. No joke, 5 times. There is a weird discrepancy between one of their numbers and Microsoft's official number. I'm not sure Richard Ledbetter knows yet. I haven't messaged him or anything to bring it up. But, and I actually have the cheat sheet that I typed out based on their video and the other information I was able to gather from elsewhere. So the number one thing that there's a discrepancy on is, according to Digital Foundry's video, using the hardware-based compression on the Xbox Series X, they're able to achieve 6 gigabytes per second throughput from the SSD. According to Microsoft themselves, it's 4.8, which is weird. You would think that at this point it would be a little bit more organized, where their messaging to Digital Foundry is exactly on point with what they're saying themselves. But who knows? I feel like we're going to see something here that is going to be hype. I think I'm actually more excited about the Xbox Series X announcement than most people I've talked to. I've tried to get them excited. I'm like, hey, this is like the future of games. It's great that we're turning this 35-second load into fucking 8. Yes, Muckbun, they compress the games just like the games are compressed this gen. Except for it's even more compressed. And I'm sure Sony will have a similar thing. I would not be surprised if Sony's SSD is faster, raw, and then using this compression technology is markedly faster, you know? Will we see new games? I expect to see one showcase of this device that is also a game announcement. Just one. You know? Because we saw Knack with the PS4. You expect something like that. I mean, this thing was aimed at GDC, but Sony knows what happens at GDC hits the whole world. I'm very excited for today, you guys. This is something I've been looking forward to for years, I guess, is a good way to put it. I've been wanting to see the things that I talk about, that I try to get people excited about for the future. I'm so excited to see it realized on screen in front of me. You know? Like, I want to be able to point and be like, that's it. Crumb and Curmudgeon, how many months has it been next gen tweets where I just go, I'm sitting here doing a thing, wish it was next gen. Which game do you think they will showcase for the system? I wouldn't be surprised if Horizon Zero Dawn, the PC version at max settings, is able to be shown on the PS5. As for what new game, Sony Japan seems to be leading the edge with that. So we either get a teaser for Horizon Zero Dawn 2 to show off some of the tech there, or we get an Ape Escape thing to show off some of the tech there, you know? Stop it, Dan. We need Knack 3. As somebody who was the #1 stand for Knack before it came out, because I do enjoy platformers, I do enjoy simple action games like that. No, we don't need any more Knack. I would argue we didn't even need Knack 2. I still haven't played Knack 2, but Put Knack in the trash where it belongs. I mean, it is that dire. I'm still coming off the cold, so I apologize about the coughing I'll be doing during this stream. Let me make sure I can full screen this YouTube video without the chat filling. We don't need to see that chat. We only need to see this chat. Our chat is the good chat. We're good boys and girls. Knack 2, double stream for next gen console money. Knack 1 is just barely short of Banjo-Kazooie levels of painful to play through, I think. It's pretty brain dead. There's no evolution of the gameplay across its, I think it was like 20 plus hours. It literally, your brain just starts shutting down by the end of that game. I say this as someone who played it through with Tosh, my girlfriend, and I love any opportunity to play games with her, and even still I couldn't save it. It was just this moment of, what the fuck am I playing? It's a 3-hit combo and an air hit, and that's the whole game. Well, guys, we're about to start. I'm going to get another bottle of water. This thing's going to be 52 minutes long. I'm so excited. Thank you for joining me. No, actually, sorry about the lack of surprise. A thing went missing. $700, no physical media. The Last of Us 3 will be a launch title. Could you imagine $700 in 2020 post certain events? Nuts. Nuts, I tell you. You know what really helped Microsoft showing off the Xbox Series X is if they showed off anything new. And I know that I'm saying this like it's only a problem with the info they gave us, but this is literally the platform. And this is why since they announced there are no exclusives for this platform, that's why I've been hammering so hard on them. Because it's like, I can't even get people excited about their platform. I can't get people excited about their platform. I'm excited for the future of gaming. Oh, fuck, it started. For anyone who's expecting a lot of hype, a lot of games, please don't. This is not going to be that. It is a thing prepared for GDC. I expect it to be a lot like the PS4 reveal in February of 2013, but with fewer games. And once again, thank you all for being here. That makes it special. I'm glad that I get to share my joy of this moment with all of you. I'm going to hit F5 because YouTube premieres are flawless beings that always work right. We're going to tab over to Twitch. Oh, we're getting the premiere sounds. We're getting premiere sounds. It's happening, you guys. Got my connection hardwired so we can get as good of a quality as possible. Yes, the 500 decibel. We'll lower it while we're still here. Wake up, gamers, cause it's the next-gen consoles with instant game loading. I was gonna grab a sandwich. I expect with how seamless the PS4 OS is compared to the Xbox One, that the suspend and resume functions will be even more impressive. Oh, fuck. Why am I recording this? I'm gonna make the dumbest fucking faces for 52 minutes. They're gonna say some shit. You guys are gonna clip me. I'm gonna be like, HBM2? Oh my god! And then you guys are gonna be like, listen to this fucking nerd. Look at this fucking nerd! Oh, it's happening. It's so much easier to concentrate on random bullshit over here than actually confront the fact that's happening right now. Okay.
Hi. Unfortunately, we had to cancel the talk that we had planned for GDC.
Yes.
But we do have some super exciting news about PS5. And who better to bring that to you than the one and only Mark Cerny. Without further ado, over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Jim. There will be lots of chances later on this year to look at the PlayStation 5 games. Today, I want to talk a bit about our goals for the PlayStation 5 hardware and how they influenced the development of the console. I think you all know I'm a big believer in console generations. Once every 5 or 6 or 7 years, a console arrives with substantially new capabilities. There's a lot of learning by the game developers, hopefully not too overwhelming, and soon
Hopefully not the PS3 game.
Been created before. Now, it used to be that as a console designer, you'd somehow intuit what would be the best set of capabilities for the new console, and then build it in complete secrecy. For the PlayStation consoles, that period lasted through PlayStation 3.
I'm just glad he's using a Sony Vaio. That's very important.
But also one that caused quite a lot of heartache, as it was initially difficult to develop games for. So, starting with PlayStation 4, we've taken a different approach, roughly centered around 3 principles. The first of these is listening to the developers, which is to say that a lot of what we put into a console derives
I saw the next bullet point was balancing revolution versus evolution, and that's killing me.
Ideas of our own, but at the core of our philosophy for designing consoles is that game players are here for the fantastic.
Taliban, you didn't know that Mark Cerny sounds like the church lady from SNL?
Anything we can do to make life
It's true, even he admits it.
Or help them realize their dreams, we will do. So, about once every 2 years, I take a tour of the industry. I go to the various developers and publishers.
For anyone who compared it to Dana Carvey plays the church lady on SNL.
Like to see in future consoles. This requires weeks on the road, as reaching the bulk of the game creators involves talking to well over 100 people at something like 24 publishers and developers. And it is incredibly valuable. By the way, the feature most requested by the developers, that was an SSD. which we were very happy to put in the hardware, but a lot of problem solving was required. I'll be doing a deep dive on the SSD and surrounding systems later on in this talk.
Okay. I was like, later on this year.
It's also
Then
key
what
to
is
make a
this?
generational leap while keeping the console sufficiently familiar to game developers.
Yeah.
I think about this in terms of balancing evolution and revolution. Now, with PlayStation 1, 2, and 3, the target
We
was a
call this the
revolution
rip and
in terms
tear
of a brand new
system.
feature set. That was great in many ways.
We
but
assure you,
time
when
for
we
the
designed the
developers to get up and
PS5, we
running
did it
not
in the
long
best
with the
interest of
console.
all mankind.
In the past, I've called this time to triangle. Here's what I had for those 3 consoles. To be clear, I'm not talking about time to make a game. Developers will be ambitious, and it may take them 6 years or so to realize their vision. What I'm talking about is that dead time before graphics and other aspects of game development are up and running.
Weirdly
and
enough, Dunham,
trying
those
to
are the people.
minimize that. On the other hand, if we're trying to reduce that dead time to 0, that means the hardware architecture can't change at all. We're handcuffed. We need to judge for each feature what value it adds and whether it's worth the increase in developer time needed to support it.
Now announcing the PS5
So
with no
PlayStation
x86
4, we were able to
processors,
strike
all
a pretty good
ARM-powered.
balance between performance and familiarity. We got required learning back to PlayStation 1 levels. With PS5, the GPU was definitely the area we felt the most tension between adding new features and
think he's-
keeping a familiar programming model. Ultimately, I think we've ended up with something under a month of getting up to speed.
That's
feels
true.
Like we're striking about the right balance.
I've heard
I'll
that
go
from a
into
lot
bit
of
more
devs,
detail
too.
later today about our philosophy with the GPU and the specific feature set that resulted from it.
PS5 is at
It's
risk.
also very important for us as the hardware
Could
team
you
to
imagine?
find new dreams, by which I mean something other than CPU performance, GPU performance.
My bingo
and
card's
the
up
amount
here.
Of RAM.
HBM2.
Increasing graphics performance over the
Higher
past
than
2
4
decades has
gigahertz
been
processor.
astonishing, but there are other areas in which we can innovate and provide significant value to the game creators and through them to the players.
Okay.
That's why the SSD was very much on our list of directions to explore, regardless of what came out of the conversations with game developers and publishers. The biggest feature in this category is the custom engine for audio. That's today's final topic. The push for vastly improved audio, and in particular, 3D audio.
I really hope they
isn't
have a
something that
showcase.
came out of the developer meetings. It's much more the case that we had a dream of what might be possible 5 years from now, and then worked out a number of steps we could take to set us on that path. So here again are the 3 principles, the first being enabling the desires of developers to drive the hardware design. To me, the SSD really is the key to the next generation. It's a game changer. And it was the #1 ask from developers for PlayStation 5. As in, we know it's probably impossible, but
Yes, Zan, man,
can
I
you
did.
put an SSD in it?
At the
That was
beginning
a
of the stream.
discussion we were also having internally. It was clear that the presence of a hard drive in every PlayStation 4 was having a positive impact. A lot of things that would simply have been impossible at Blu-ray disc speeds were now possible.
You mean
At
most
the same
things?
time, though, in 2015 and
Good
2016,
Lord.
when we were having these conversations, developers were already banging up against the limits of the hard drive. And a lot of developer time was being spent designing around slow load
An insane amount of time. And data
I want to
redundancy.
focus in on just one number here, which is how long it takes to load a gigabyte of data from a hard drive. The difficulty being that hard drives are neither particularly fast nor flexible. If all your data is in one block, which is frankly not very likely, you can load 50 to 100 megabytes a second, depending on where the data is located on the hard drive. Let's
So
assume it's on the
if you're
outside,
thinking
which
about
means
how
loading
long
a gigabyte takes 10 seconds. If
Kingdom
you
Hearts
compress
3
your
takes to
data
load,
packages, you can fit more data
he's
on
about
the
to
Blu-ray
explain it
disc,
somewhat.
and also effectively boost your hard drive read speed by the compression ratio. We
Yep.
support zlib decompression on PlayStation 4 that gets you something like 50% more data on the disk and 50% higher effective read speed. Unfortunately, though, it's highly likely that your data is scattered around in various files on the hard drive, as well as sourced from multiple locations within those files. So lots of seeks are needed at 2 to 50-ish milliseconds each. My rule of thumb
It's
is
not
that the
great.
hard drive is spending 2/3 of its time seeking and only 1/3 of its time actually loading data. Putting all of that together, a gigabyte is very roughly 20 seconds to load from a hard drive.
I'm just glad he's explaining
Now,
it, so
a
if anyone
gigabyte
asks me
is
to
not
explain, I
much
can
data.
just
Games
point.
are using 5 or 6 gigabytes of RAM on PlayStation 4, so boot times and load times can get pretty grim. Or to put that differently, As a player, you wait for the game to boot.
To put that
wait for
differently,
the
you've
game
played
to load,
Bloodborne, right?
Wait for the level to reload every time you die, and you wait for what is euphemistically called fast
how does
travel.
that?
And all of that leads to the dream. What if we could have not just an SSD, but a blindingly fast SSD?
Instantaneous!
5 gigabytes a second from it. What would change?
Also,
Now, SSDs are
5
completely
gigabytes
different
per
from hard
second.
drives. They don't have
That's
speeds as such.
a higher
If you
number
have
than
a 5
Microsoft's
gigabyte
already.
second SSD, you can read
Is
data
this
from
an
1,000
estimate?
different
Is
locations
it a
in 1
target
second,
goal?
pretty much at speed. As for time to load a gigabyte, this is next gen we're talking about, so memory is bigger. Instead, we should be asking how long to load 2 gigabytes. And the answer is about a quarter of a second. I mean, that's amazing. We're talking 2 orders of magnitude, meaning very roughly 100 times faster. Which means at 5 gigabytes a second for the SSD, the potential is that the game boots in a second. There are no
The sick
load screens,
Winamp
that game just
visualizer
fades
you
down
have
while
going on there,
loading
Mark.
a half dozen gigabytes and fades back up again. Same for a reload. You're immediately back in the action after you die. And fast travel becomes so fast it's blink and you miss it. As game creators, we go from trying to distract the player from how long fast travel is taking, like those Spider-Man subway rides, to being so blindingly fast that we might even have to slow that transition down. Pretty cool, right? But for me, this is not the primary reason to change from a hard drive to an SSD.
What's
the primary reason for an ultra-fast SSD is that it gives the game designer freedom. Or to put that
Freedom's
differently,
cool,
with a hard
but
drive,
instant
the
rematches in
20
fucking Arc
seconds
6
it
fighting
takes to load a
games
gigabyte
is even better.
sabotage the game
Grand Blue
the
takes way too long to
developer is
load.
trying to create. I think almost all of us in the room have experienced this, maybe in different ways. Say we're making an adventure game and we have 2 rich environments where we each want enough textures and models to fill memory, which you can do as long as you have a long staircase or elevator ride or a winding
crevice.
corridor where you can ditch the old assets and
gotta
then
do
take
this
30
number.
seconds or so to load the new assets. Having a 30-second elevator ride is a little extreme. More realistically, we'd probably chop the world into a number of smaller pieces and then do some calculations with sight lines and run speeds like we did for Haven City when we were making Jak 2. The game is 20
That's right,
years old,
boys.
but not much has changed since then.
The PS5 could load all of Jak 2 into RAM.
There's a whole subset of level design dedicated to this sort of work, but still, it's a giant distraction for a team.
To be
that
clear,
just wants
Mark
to make
Cerny worked on Jak 2.
So when I talked about the dream of an SSD, part of the reason for that 5 gigabyte a second target was to eliminate loads, but also part of the reason for that target was streaming. As in, what if the SSD is so fast that as the player is turning around, it's possible to load textures for everything behind the player in that split second? If you figure that it takes half a second to turn, that's
bringing
4
back mega
gigabytes of
textures?
data you can load. That sounds about right for next gen. Anyway, back to the hard drive. Another strategy for increasing effective read speed is to make big sequential chunks of data. For example, we might group all the data together for each city block. That removes most of the seeks, and the streaming gets faster.
But
there's a downside too,
Yes,
which
there
is
is.
that frequently used data is included in many chunks and therefore is on the hard drive many, many times. Marvel's Spider-Man uses this strategy, and though it works very well for increasing the streaming speed, there's a massive duplication as a result. Some of the objects like mailboxes or news racks are on the hard drive 400 times. What I'm describing here are things that cramp a creative director's style. Either level design gets a little bit boring in places, or the data is duplicated so many times that it no longer fits on the Blu-ray disc. And you end up with hard limits on the player's run speed or driving speed. The player can't go faster than the load speed from the hard drive.
yeah, I've played
And
Death
finally,
Stranding.
I'm sure many of you have noticed that after a patch download, the PlayStation 4 will sometimes take a long time to install the patch. That's because when just part of a file has been changed, the new data can be downloaded pretty quickly. But before the game boots out,
I didn't think about
brand new
this.
file has to be constructed that includes
We
the
hit a
changed
thing I
version.
didn't think about.
Otherwise, every change would add a seek or two. Even so, you can occasionally see this happening on game titles. They start to hitch once they get patched enough.
I'm really glad
With
that
an
we hit a thing I
SSD,
didn't
though,
think about
no
once.
seeks. So no need to make brand new files with the changes incorporated
Yeah.
into them, which means no installs as you know them today.
Oh my god!
There's yet one more benefit, which is that system memory can be used much more efficiently.
Fucked up.
On PlayStation 4, game data on the hard drive feels very distant and difficult to use. By the time you realize you need a piece of data, it's much too late to go out and load it. So system
Fucking
memory has to
installing
contain all of
patches
the data
done.
that can be used in the next 30 seconds
That's
or so
fucked.
of gameplay. That means a lot of the 8 gigabytes of system memory is idle. It's just waiting there to be potentially used. On PlayStation 5, though, the SSD is very close.
We're just
to
gonna out how much RAM it has and what type.
Typically, it's fast
Okay.
enough that when you
There we
realize
go.
you need a piece of
HBMD
data,
confirmed.
You can just load it from the SSD.
Which is what I
and use
expected.
it.
HBM2
There's
would have
no
been
need to
insane.
have lots of data.
They wouldn't have had
parked
to
in
have.
system memory
They
where
wouldn't
it
have
could
been able to have so
potentially
much
be
RAM.
used.
They wouldn't have.
A
Yeah.
different way of saying that is that most of RAM is working on the game's behalf. This is one of the reasons that 16 gigabytes of GDDR6 feels right for PlayStation 5. The presence of the SSD reduces the need for a massive intergenerational increase in size. So back to the dream of the SSD. Here's the set of targets. Boot the game in a second.
Time to wake up for the
No
dream.
load screens. Design freedom, meaning no twisty passages or long corridors. More game on the disk and more game on the SSD. And finally, those patch installs.
I can't. We
The
killed
reality,
patch
though, is that
installs.
the
That's
SSD
fucking
is
dope.
Just one piece of the puzzle. There's a lot of places where bottlenecks can occur in between the
Yeah.
SSD and the game code that
Which is why you need a
game.
great SSD.
You can see this on PlayStation 4. If I use an SSD with 10 times the speed of a standard hard drive, I probably see only double the loading speed, if that. For PlayStation 5, our goal was not just that the SSD itself be 100 times faster. It was that game loads and streaming would be 100 times faster. So every single potential bottleneck needed to be addressed. And there are a lot of them.
Yeah, there are.
Let's look at check-in and what happens when its overhead gets
He's like,
100
there are a
times
lot of them.
larger. Conceptually, check-in is a pretty simple process. Data is loaded into system memory from the hard drive or SSD. It's examined. A few values are tweaked to check it in, and then it's moved to its final location. At the SSD
keeps
speeds we're
saying the
talking
tweet.
about,
I get
that
you
last part,
should.
moving the data, meaning copying it from one location to another, takes roughly an entire next-gen CPU core. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. If all the overheads get 100 times larger, that will cripple the frame rate as soon as the player moves, and that massive stream of data starts coming off.
This is another reason why I keep
So to
saying
solve all
that
of that, we built
these
a
consoles
lot of custom hardware, namely
are
a
going to
custom
be able
flash
to do this
controller
shit way
and
better
a
than
number
PC.
of custom units in our main chip. The flash controller in the SSD was designed for smooth and bottleneck-free operation, but also with games in mind. For example, there are 6 levels of priority when reading from the SSD. Priority is very important. You can imagine the player heading into some new location in the world and the game requesting a few gigabytes of textures. And while those textures are being loaded, an enemy is shot and has to speak a few dying words. Having multiple priority levels lets the audio for those dying words get loaded immediately. On one side, that flash controller connects to the actual
That's a
flash
higher
drives
number.
that supply the storage. To reach our bandwidth target of 5 gigabytes a second, we ended up with a 12-channel interface. 8 channels wouldn't be enough. The resulting bandwidth we've achieved is actually 5.5 gigabytes a second. With a 12-channel interface, the most natural size that emerges for an SSD is 825 gigabytes. The key question for us was, is that enough? I mean, it's tempting to add more, but Flash certainly doesn't come cheap, and we have a responsibility to our gaming audience to be cost-effective with regards to what we put in the console. Ultimately, we resolved this question by looking at the play patterns of a broad range of gamers.
Okay.
We examined
What are we doing?
specific games that they were playing over the course of a weekend or a week or a month, and whether that set of games would fit properly on the SSD.
What are you doing,
We
man?
were able to establish that the friction caused by reinstalls or redownloads would be quite low. And so we locked in on that 825 gigabyte size, while also preparing multiple strategies so that those who want more storage can add it. I'll go through the details in a moment.
Damn.
Back to the flash controller. On the other side, it connects to our main custom chip via 4 lanes of Gen 4 PCIe. And inside the main custom chip is a pretty hefty unit dedicated to I/O. Before we talk about what that does, let's talk compression for a moment. PlayStation 4 used zlib as its compression format. We decided to use it again on PlayStation 5, but on my 2017 tour of developers, I learned about a new format called Kraken
Yes.
from Rad Game Tools.
Yes.
It's like zlib's smarter cousin.
Incredibly.
Similar types of algorithms, but about 10% better compression, which is pretty big. That means 10% more game on the UHD Blu-ray disc or on the SSD. Kraken had only been out for a year, but it was already becoming a de facto industry standard. Half of the teams I talked to were either using it or getting ready to evaluate it. So we hustled and built a custom decompressor into the I/O unit, one capable of handling over 5 gigabytes of Kraken format input data a second. After decompression, that typically becomes 8 or 9 gigabytes, but the unit itself is capable of outputting as much as 22 gigabytes a second if the data happen to compress particularly well. By the way, in terms of performance, that custom decompressor equates to 9 of our Zen 2 cores. That's what it would take to decompress the Kraken stream with a conventional CPU. There's a lot more in the custom I/O unit, including a dedicated DMA controller. The game can direct exactly where it wants to send the data coming off of the SSD. This equates to another Zen 2 core or two in terms of its copy performance. Its primary purpose is to remove check-in as a bottleneck. There's 2 dedicated I/O coprocessors.
See, and this is a thing you can't do on PC. You can't have Steam or other custom hardware compress. Windows won't let you use a compressor like that at that level.
This lets us bypass traditional file I/O and its bottlenecks.
I do expect to see better load times and things on PS5.
Mapping, which I know doesn't sound like anything related to the SSD, but a lot of developers map and remap memory as part of file I/O, and this too can become a bottleneck. There are coherency engines to assist the coprocessors. Coherency comes up a lot in places. Probably the biggest coherency issue is stale data in the GPU caches. Flushing all of the GPU caches whenever the SSD is read is an unattractive option. It could really hurt the GPU performance. So we've implemented a gentler way of doing things, where the coherency engines inform the GPU of the overwritten address ranges, and custom scrubbers in several dozen GPU caches do pinpoint evictions of just those address ranges. The best thing is, as a game developer, when you read from the SSD, you don't need to know any of this. You don't even need to know that your data is compressed. You just indicate what data you'd like to read from your original uncompressed file and where you'd like to put it, and the whole process of loading it happens invisibly to you and at very high speed. Back to the dream. Thanks to all of that surrounding hardware, our 5.5 gigabytes
Back to the dream
really should translate into something like 100 times faster I/O than PS4 and allow the dream of no load screens and super fast streaming to become a reality. Having said that,
thank you for the follow.
Expandability of our SSD is going to be quite important. Flash is costly, and you may very well want to add storage to whatever we put in the console. Now, the kind of storage you need depends on how you're going to use it. If you have an extensive PlayStation 4 library and you'd like to take advantage of backwards compatibility to play those games on PlayStation 5,
thank God,
then a large external hard drive is ideal. You can leave your games on the hard drive and play them directly from there.
This already saves my
saving
ass.
the pricier SSD storage for your PlayStation 5 titles, or you can copy your active PlayStation 4 titles to the SSD. If your purpose in adding more storage is to play PlayStation 5 titles, though, ideally you would add to your SSD storage.
Oh, was that KZ?
We will be supporting certain M2 SSDs. These are internal drives that you can get on the open market and install in a bay in the PlayStation 5. As for which ones we support and when, I'll get to that in a moment. They connect through the custom I/O unit just like our SSD does, so they can take full advantage of the decompression, I/O coprocessors, and all the other features I was talking about. Here's the catch, though. That commercial drive has to be at least as fast as ours. Games that rely on the speed of our SSD need to work flawlessly with any M2 drive. When I gave the Wired interview last year, I said that the PlayStation 5 SSD was faster than anything available on PC. At the time, commercial M2 drives used PCIe 3.0, and 4 lanes of that cap out at 3.5 gigabytes a second. In other words, no PCIe 3.0 drive can hit the required spec. M2 drives with PCIe 4.0 are now out in the market. We're getting in samples and seeing 4 or 5 gigabytes a second from them. By year's end, I expect there will be drives that saturate 4.0 and support 7 gigabytes a second. Having said that, we are comparing apples and oranges, though, because that commercial M2 drive will have its own architecture, its own flash controller, and so on. For example, the NVMe specification lays out a priority scheme for requests that the M2 drives can use. And that scheme is pretty nice, but it only has 2 true priority levels. Our drive supports 6. We can hook up a drive with only 2
This is the nightmare of putting an SSD in your
system.
system.
I/O unit has to arbitrate the extra priorities rather than the M2 drive's flash controller. And so the M2 drive needs a little extra speed to take care of issues arising from the different approach. That commercial drive also needs to physically fit inside of the bay we created in PlayStation 5 for M2 drives. Unlike internal hard drives, there's unfortunately no standard for the height of an M2 drive. And some
That's
M2
correct,
drives have
Boof.
giant heat sinks. In fact, some of them even have their own fans. Right now, we're getting M2 drive samples and benchmarking in various ways. When games hit beta as they get ready for the PlayStation 5
It's an
launch
appropriately
year-end,
sized crowd
we'll
for
also
this
be
time of
doing some
year.
compatibility testing to make sure that the architecture of particular M2 drives isn't too foreign for the games to handle. Once we've done that compatibility testing, we should be able to start letting you know which drives will physically fit and which drive samples have benchmarked appropriately high in our testing. It would be great if that happened by launch, but it's likely to be a bit past it. So please hold off on getting that M2 drive until you hear from us. Okay, back to our principles.
So instead of making a
Evolution
proprietary
and
thing, they're
revolution
just
is
going to
the
have
same.
a
This was
approved
definitely
list.
a recurring theme with the GPU.
That's good.
We need new GPU
That'll
features and capabilities.
drive down cost.
If we only have more performance, it's not really a new generation of console. Of course, many of these capabilities result in more performance. That's part of why a PlayStation 5 teraflop is more powerful than a PlayStation 4 teraflop. But we aren't just looking for the performance. We also need the ability to do something with the GPU that could not have been done before.
Ray tracing.
We need higher performance per watt. Every time we double the performance of some GPU component, we don't want to find out we've doubled the power consumed and the heat produced. But at the same time, we have to make sure the GPU can run PS4 games, and we have to ensure that the architecture is easy for the developers to adopt. Now, backwards compatibility was handled masterfully by AMD. They treated it as a key need throughout the design process. As our solution to adding new features without blindsiding developers, we made sure that if there were new significant features, it would be optional to use them. The GPU supports ray tracing, but you don't have to use ray tracing to make your game. The GPU supports primitive shaders, but you can release your first game on PlayStation 5 without making any use of them. Before I get into the capabilities of the GPU, I'd like to make clear 2 points that can be quite confusing. First, we have a custom AMD GPU based on their RDNA 2 technology. What does that mean? AMD is continuously improving and revising their tech. For RDNA 2, their goals were, roughly speaking, to reduce power consumption by re-architecting the GPU to put data close to where it's needed, to optimize the GPU for performance, and to add a new, more advanced feature set. But that feature set is malleable, which is to say that we have our own needs for PlayStation, and that can factor into what the AMD roadmap becomes. So collaboration is born. If we bring concepts to AMD that are felt to be widely useful, then they can be adopted into RDNA 2 and used broadly, including in PC GPUs. If the ideas are sufficiently specific to what we're trying to accomplish, like the GPU cache scrubbers I was talking about, then they end up being just for us. If you see a similar discrete
Well, he
GPU
answered the question I had
available as
earlier.
a PC card at roughly the same time as we release our console, that means our collaboration with AMD succeeded in producing technology useful in both worlds. It doesn't mean that we as Sony simply incorporated the PC part into our console. This continuous improvement in AMD technology means it's dangerous to rely on teraflops as an absolute indicator of performance, and CU count should be avoided as well. In the case of CPUs, we all understand this. The PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5 each have 8 CPUs, but we never think that meant the capabilities and performance are equal. It's the same for CPUs. For one thing, they've been getting much larger over time. Adding new features means adding lots of transistors. In fact, the transistor count for a PlayStation 5 CU is 62% larger than the transistor count for a PlayStation 4 CU. Second, the PlayStation 5 GPU is backwards compatible with PlayStation 4. What does that mean? One way you can achieve backwards compatibility is to put the previous console's chipset in the new console.
Okay,
like we did
that
with some
fucking
PlayStation
got me
3s.
for a
But
second.
that's, of course,
That got me for a second.
extremely
I was like, you can't
A
say
better
back
way is to
compat
incorporate
and then
any
show
differences
that
in the previous
in a
console's
PS5
logic
talk.
into the new console's custom chip.
You can't.
Meaning that
He's just
even as
explaining
the
they have a
technology
PS.
evolves, the logic and feature set that PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 4 Pro titles rely on is still available in backwards compatibility modes. One advantage of this strategy is that once backwards compatibility is in the console, it's in. It's not as if a cost down will remove backwards compatibility like it did on PlayStation 3. Achieving this unification of functionality took years of efforts by AMD, as any roadmap advancement creates a potential divergence in logic. Running PS4 and PS4 titles at boosted frequencies has also added complexity. The boost is truly massive this time around, and some game code just can't handle it. Testing has to be done on a title-by-title basis. Results are excellent, though. We recently took a look at the top 100 PlayStation 4 titles as ranked by playtime, and we're expecting almost all of them to be playable at launch on PlayStation 5. With regards to new features, as I said, our strategy was to try to break new ground, but at the same time not to require use of the new GPU capabilities. For more than a decade, GPUs have imposed a restriction on game engines. Software handles vertex processing, but for the most part, dedicated hardware is responsible for the triangles and other geometry that the vertices form. That means it's not possible to do even basic optimizations, such as aborting processing of a vertex if all geometry that uses it is off-screen. PlayStation 5 has a new unit called the Geometry Engine, which brings handling of triangles and other primitives under full programmatic control. As a game developer, you're free to ignore its existence and use the PlayStation 5 GPU as if it were no more capable than the PS4 GPU, or you can use this new intelligence in various ways. Simple usage could be performance optimization, such as removing back-faced or off-screen vertices and triangles. More complex usage involves something called primitive shaders, which allow the game to synthesize geometry on the fly as it's being rendered. It's a brand new capability. Using primitive shaders on PlayStation 5 will allow for a broad variety of techniques, including smoothly varying level of detail, addition of procedural detail to close-up objects, and improvements to particle effects and other visual special effects. Another major new feature of our custom RDNA 2-based GPU is ray tracing, using the same strategy as AMD's upcoming PC GPUs. The CUs contain a new specialized unit called the intersection engine, which can calculate the intersection of rays with boxes and triangles. To use the intersection engine, first you build what is called an acceleration structure. It's data in RAM that contains all of your geometry. There's a specific set of formats you can use. They're variations on the same BVH concept. Then, in your shader program, you use a new instruction that asks the intersection engine to check a ray against the BVH. While the intersection engine is processing the requested ray triangle or ray box intersections, the shaders are free to do other work. Having said that, the ray tracing instruction is pretty memory intensive, so it's a good mix with logic-heavy code. There's of course no need to use ray tracing. PS4 graphics engines will run just fine on PlayStation 5, but it presents an opportunity for those interested. I'm thinking
I like that it's a scale of difficulty.
A second to have a big impact on audio. That should be enough for audio occlusion and some reverb calculations.
There you go, everyone.
With a bit more of the GPU invested in ray tracing, it should be possible to do some very nice global illumination.
The left one is Goo Goo Gaga, the right one is Hurt Me More.
Ray-traced shadows and reflections to a traditional graphics engine could easily take hundreds of millions of rays a second, and full ray tracing could take billions. How far can we go? I'm starting to get quite bullish. I've already seen a PlayStation 5 title that's successfully using ray tracing-based reflections in complex animated scenes with only modest costs. Another set of issues for the GPU involved size and frequency.
Admittedly, reflections are the most important thing.
And what frequency do we run it at? This is a balancing act. The chip has a cost, and there's a cost for whatever we use to supply that chip with power and to cool it. In general, I like running the GPU at higher frequency. Let me show you why. Here's two possible configurations for a GPU roughly of the level of the PlayStation 4 Pro. This is a thought experiment. Don't take these configurations too seriously. If you just calculate teraflops, you get the same number. But actually, the performance is noticeably different.
If this motherfucker's going to tell me that they have fewer teraflops on paper, but it's clocked way motherfucking higher.
There are a lot of other units. And those other units all run faster when the GPU frequency is higher. At 33% higher frequency, rasterization goes 33% faster. Processing the command buffer goes that much faster. The L2 and other caches have that much higher bandwidth.
If this is real,
about the only downside is that system memory is 33% further away in terms of cycles.
Yes.
But the large number of benefits more than counterbalance that. As a friend of mine says, a rising tide lifts all boats. Also, it's easier to fully use 36 CUs
so you can pull that out every time he comes
than it is
to
to
talk?
fully use 48 CUs. When triangles are small, it's much harder to fill all those CUs with useful work.
Yes.
So there's a lot to be said for faster, assuming you can handle the resulting power and heat issues, which frankly, we haven't always done the best job at. Part of the reason for that is, historically, our process for setting CPU and GPU frequencies has relied on some heavy-duty guesswork with regards to how much electrical
That's my
power
PS4 when I loaded
and
Kingdom
how much
Hearts.
heat will be produced as a result.
All the way to the
console.
right.
Power consumption varies a lot from game to game. When I play God of War on my PS4 Pro, I know the power consumption is high just by the fan noise. But power isn't simply about engine quality. It's about the minutia of what's being displayed and how. It's counterintuitive, but processing dense geometry typically consumes less power than processing simple geometry, which is, I suspect, why Horizon's map screen, with its low triangle count, makes my PS4 Pro heat up so much.
Thank you for explaining that.
Our process on previous consoles has been to try to guess what the maximum power consumption during the entire console lifetime might be, which is to say, the worst case scene in the worst case game, and prepare a cooling solution
we throw in
that
actual
would be quiet
fans
at that power level. If we get it right, fan noise is minimal. If we get it wrong, the console will be quite loud for the higher power games, and there's even a chance that it might overheat and shut down if we misestimate power too badly. PlayStation 5 is especially challenging because the CPU supports 256-bit native instructions that consume a lot of power. These are great here and there, but presumably
like AVX.
only minimally used.
Okay.
Or are they? If we plan for major 256-bit instruction usage, we need to set the CPU clock substantially lower or noticeably increase the size of the power supply and fan. So, after much discussion, we decided to go with a very different direction on PlayStation 5.
Talk to me.
We built a GPU with 36 CUs. Mind you, RDNA 2 CUs are large. Each has 60%
That's a
more
lot
transistors
fewer than
the
Microsoft,
CUs
if
we
I'm
were
not-
using on PlayStation
Where's my
4.
cheat sheet?
So if we compare transistor counts, 36 RDNA 2 CUs
Where the hell
equates
my
to
cheat
roughly
sheet go?
58 PlayStation 4 CUs. It is a fairly sizable GPU. Then we went with a variable frequency
52 is
strategy
how
for
many they
PlayStation
have,
5,
so-
which is to say we continuously
That's-
run the GPU and CPU in boost mode.
It's almost
We
2/3,
supply
isn't
a
it?
generous amount of electrical power and then increase the frequency of GPU and CPU until they reach the capabilities of the system.
This shit's getting weird, guys.
It's a completely different paradigm. Rather than running at constant frequency and letting power vary based on the workload, we run at essentially constant power and let the frequency vary based on the workload. We then tackled the engineering challenge of a cost-effective and high-performance cooling solution designed for that specific power level. In some ways, it becomes a simpler problem because there are no more unknowns. There's no need to guess what power consumption the worst-case game might have. As for the details of the cooling solution, we're saving them for our teardown. I think you'll be quite happy with what the engineering team came up with.
Yeah, I won, which is
So
why I want to see it
how fast
today.
can we run the GPU and CPU with this strategy? The simplest approach would be to look at the actual temperature of the silicon die and throttle the frequency on that basis. But that won't work. It fails to create a consistent PlayStation 5 experience. It wouldn't do to run a console slower simply because it was in a hot room. So rather than look at the actual temperature of the silicon die, we look at the activities that the GPU and CPU are performing and set the frequencies on that basis, which makes everything deterministic and repeatable. While we're at it, we also use AMD's Smart Shift technology and send any unused power from the CPU to the GPU so it can squeeze out a few more pixels. The benefits of this strategy are quite large. Running a GPU at 2 gigahertz was looking like an unreachable target with the old fixed frequency strategy. With this new paradigm, we're able to run way over that. In fact, we have to cap the GPU frequency at 2.23 gigahertz so that we can guarantee that the on-chip logic operates properly. 36 CUs at 2.23 gigahertz is 10.3 teraflops, and we expect the GPU to spend most of its time at or close to that frequency and performance. Similarly, running the CPU at 3 gigahertz was causing headaches with the old strategy. But now we can run it as 3.5 gigahertz.
No,
in fact,
that's not
it spends most
That's not
of
that
its
high,
time
is it?
at frequency.
That is slightly lower than.
That doesn't mean all games
Guys,
will be running at 2.23 gigahertz.
Guys,
3.5 gigahertz.
if this shit
when that worst
is
case case
somehow
arrives, it will run at a lower clock speed, but not too much lower. To
So-
reduce power by 10%, it only takes a couple
what
of
we're
percent
talking about-
reduction in frequency. So I'd expect any downclocking to be pretty minor. All things considered, the change to a variable frequency approach will show significant gains for PlayStation gamers. The final of our
they're
three
fundamentally
principles was
doing
about
a very
finding new
different
dreams.
approach from
It's
Microsoft.
important for us on the hardware team to find new ways to expand or deepen gaming, and that's what
This
led
is
us to
weird, but
focus on 3D audio.
performance-wise, the difference we're talking about here
As
is
players, we experience the game through the visuals, through audio,
14%,
and through the feedback we
15%
receive
on the
from
GPU
control,
side?
such as rumble or haptics. Personally, I feel a game is just dead without audio. Visuals are, of course, important, but the impact of audio is huge as well.
That's
At the same time, the audio team on a game project has to do a lot with a little. For example, on PlayStation 4, there's fierce competition for the Jaguar CPU cores. Audio typically ends up getting just a fraction of a core. That's not much of a computational resource, particularly when you consider that the visuals run at 30 or 60 frames a second, but audio processing needs to happen at almost 200 times a second.
Yeah.
So it's been tough going making forward progress on audio with PlayStation 4, particularly when PlayStation 3 was such a beast when it came to audio. The SPUs in Cell were almost a perfect device for audio rendering. Simple pipelined algorithms could really take advantage of asynchronous DMA and frequently reached 100% utilization of the floating point unit. There's unfortunately nothing comparable on PlayStation 4. Probably the most dramatic progress in the PlayStation 4 generation has been with virtual reality. The PSVR hardware has its own audio unit. It supports about 50 pretty decent 3D sound sources. And this provided a hint as to where we could go with audio, as well as some valuable experience. Not to oversimplify, but here were our goals for audio on PlayStation 5. The first goal was great audio for everyone, not just VR users or soundbar owners or headphone users. That meant audio had to be part of the console. It couldn't be a peripheral.
For people who don't know, this is actually one of the most exciting things about this console.
We didn't want developers to have to pick and choose what sounds would get 3D effects and which wouldn't. We wanted every sound in the game to have dimensionality. And finally, we wanted to really take on the challenges of presence and locality. Now, when we say presence, we mean the feeling that you're actually there. You've entered the matrix. It's not, of course, something we thought we could perfectly achieve, but the idea was that if we stopped using just a rain sound and instead used lots of 3D audio sources for raindrops hitting the ground at all sorts of locations around you, then at some point your brain would take a leap and you'd begin to have this feeling of real presence inside the virtual world of the game. This has the capacity to affect your appreciation of the game, just like music in a game does. The concept of locality is simpler. It's just your sense of where the audio is coming from, to the right of you, behind you, above you. This can immerse you further in the game, and it can also directly enhance the gameplay. To use Dead Space as an example, I know, old school. You're fighting enemies
He's like,
in
I know,
fairly dark, spooky
it's been
locations.
like 13 years.
Back in the day, if you played the game using the TV speakers, you could tell that there was one last enemy growling and hunting you down, but it was difficult to tell quite where that enemy was. With headphones, you could tell that the enemy was somewhere on the right, which let you deduce, if you couldn't see it, that it must be somewhere behind and to your right. But with 3D audio with good locality, the idea is you know the enemy is precisely
It's so exciting
there,
for me.
and you turn and you take it out.
Because, yeah,
So,
the
how do
3D
we
audio
know
on the
where sound
PSVR is
coming
really
from
good.
in the first place?
I would love every game to sound that good.
All those bumps and folds in the ear have a meaning, evolutionarily speaking. Based on what direction the sound is coming from, sound waves bounce around inside the ear, there's some constructive and destructive interference, and the result is a change in volume. The phase of the sound also shifts, depending on what path the sound wave took to reach the ear canal.
It's nuts that
These
they're calculating
volume changes
all this
and
shit.
phase shifts are different for each direction and also
every
vary
game.
depending
That's
on
really
the
cool.
frequency of the sound. Head size and head shape also impact the sound in a similar fashion. The way that the sound changes based on direction and frequency can be encoded in a table called the Head-Related Transfer Function, or HRTF. Here's part of one. The vertical axis
If you
is the
asked me
frequency,
what would show up
the
at this
horizontal
conference.
axis is the direction, front, back, left, right, and the color gives the degree of attenuation of the sound at that frequency.
Fuck.
The HRTF is as unique to
cannot.
an individual as a
I
fingerprint.
can't believe this
In fact,
chart's showing
you're
up
looking at mine
here.
right
Like
now.
this sort of shit. That is
Here's
nuts.
how we measure an HRTF. We've taken hundreds of people through this process. We put a microphone in the subject's left and right ear canals.
Excuse me, is
and then
that Sid
put the
Schumann?
subject down in the middle of an array of 22 speakers. We then play an
I think
audio
that's Sid
sweep from each speaker as we rotate the subject. In the course of 10 or 20 minutes, we're able to sample the HRTF at over 1,000 locations. Using an HRTF when rendering audio creates unparalleled quality, but it's computationally expensive.
That's
The
fucking
simplest way to
insane.
use an
This
HRTF
is so
to
dope.
process a sound
Guys.
source to make it appear as if it's coming from
Please
one of
stop
the 1,000
experimenting on
locations we
Sid
sampled.
Schumann. No.
Unfortunately, the processing has
fine.
to be done in frequency domain rather than time domain, so there's multiple fast Fourier transforms needed for every sound source for every audio tick.
Yeah.
That's a lot of multiplies.
Yes, it's
This
insane.
computational complexity was the determining factor for our strategy. It meant we had to bite the bullet and design and build a custom hardware unit for 3D audio. Collectively, we're referring to the hardware unit and the proprietary algorithms we run on it as Tempest 3D Audio Tech. The meaning of 3D audio and technology should be pretty obvious here. As for Tempest, I feel it really reflects our
sick.
goals with audio. It suggests a
was
certain
fucking dope.
intensity of experience and also hints at your presence within it. We're calling the hardware unit that we built the Tempest engine. It's based on AMD's GPU technology. We modified a compute unit in such a way as to make it very close to the SPUs in PlayStation 3. Remember when I said that they were ideal for audio? So the Tempest engine has no caches, just like an SPU. All data access
Stop
is via
cockteasing me
DMA,
like this.
just like an SPU. Our target was that it would have more power than a CPU, thanks to the parallelism that a GPU can achieve, and that it would be more efficient than our GPU, thanks to the SPU-like architecture. The goal being to make possible near 100% utilization of the CU's vector units. Where we ended up is a unit with roughly the same SIMD power and bandwidth as all 8 Jaguar cores in the PlayStation 4 combined. If we were to use the same algorithms as PSVR, that's enough for something like 5,000 sound sources. But of course, we want to use more complex algorithms, and we don't need anything like that number of sounds. It would have been wonderful if a simpler strategy, such as using Dolby Atmos peripherals, could have achieved our goals, but we wanted 3D audio for all, not just those with licensed soundbars or the
Thank
like.
you.
Also, we wanted many hundreds of sound sources, not just the 32 that Atmos supports. And finally, we wanted to be able to throw an overwhelming amount of processing power at the problem, and it wasn't clear what any peripheral might have inside of it. In fact, with the Tempest engine, we've even got enough power that we can allocate some to the games, to the extent that games want to make use of convolution reverb and other algorithms that are either computationally expensive or need high bandwidth. But the primary purpose of the Tempest engine remains 3D audio. Now, 3D audio
That's
is
what
a
we're led to
major
believe, Mussy.
academic research topic. It's safe to
I'm
say that
so
no
excited.
one in the world has
This
all of the
console gen
answers.
just got
And
really
a set
exciting.
of algorithms that has to be invented, tuned, or implemented to realize our vision for 3D audio is immense. For example, use of HRTFs in games is quite complex. Before, I talked about making a sound source appear as if it's coming from one of those 1,000 HRTF sample locations. But for high-quality 3D game audio, we have to handle other possibilities. The sound source might not be at one of the 1,000 HRTF sample locations, so we have to blend the HRTF data from the closest locations that we have sampled. The sound source might be moving, which needs very special handling as that blend keeps changing, and that can cause phase artifacts in the resulting audio. Or the sound source might have a size to it, meaning it should feel as if it's coming from an area rather than a single point. There's also whole categories of approaches to be handled. 3D audio can be implemented using individual processing of 3D sound sources. But alternatively, ambisonics can be used for 3D audio. Ambisonics being somewhat like the spherical harmonics used in computer graphics. And finally, there's audio devices. The player might be using headphones or TV speakers or have a higher-end surround sound setup with 6 or more speakers, all of which need different approaches. That's a lot of variations. It's nice to have the computational resources of the Tempest engine, but it's clear that achieving our ultimate goals with 3D audio is going to be a multi-year, step-by-step process. Having said that, headphone audio implementation is largely complete at this time.
Great.
It was a natural place for us to start. With headphones, we control exactly what each ear hears, and therefore the algorithm.
I look forward to pissing myself over your fucking Silent Hill game.
For TV speakers and stereo speakers, we're in the process of implementing virtual surround sound. The idea being that if you're sitting in a sweet spot in front of the TV, then the sound can be made to feel as if it's coming from any direction, even behind you. Virtual surround sound has a lot in common with 3D audio on headphones, but it's more complex.
That's really
because
fucking hard to
the
implement.
left ear can hear the right speaker and vice versa.
As someone
We
with
have
an
a
ideal
basic
setup,
implementation of
even
virtual
then, it's
surround sound
impressive.
up and running. We're now looking at increasing the size of that sweet spot, which is to say, making the area you need to be in to feel the 3D effect larger, and we're also working to boost the sense of locality. Headphone audio is the current gold standard for 3D audio on PlayStation 5, but we're going to see what we can do to bring virtual surround sound to a similar level, after which we'll start in on setups with more speakers, such as 6-channel surround sound. It's now to the point where some of the PlayStation 5 games in development are extensively using these systems. One of the game demos allows you to toggle between conventional PlayStation 4 style stereo audio and our new 3D audio. I listened with just an ordinary pair of over-the-ear headphones, and wow, I could feel a difference. 3D audio has that dimensional feel to it. Conventional stereo audio feels smashed flat by comparison. The improvement is obvious. So, a big advancement, but have I entered the matrix? Does my brain believe I'm really there, like I was talking about earlier when I explained our target of presence? Well, the answer is no. But you've probably caught on to what's missing here, namely whose HRTF was being used. It wasn't mine, it was the default HRTF. The audio team analyzed the hundreds that they measured and chose the one they felt was the closest fit to the total game-playing audience. This shows a piece of the default HRTF on the left and my HRTF on the right. You can see that the general features are much the same, but the details are quite different. With the default HRTF, as I said, the 3D audio sounds pretty great. When I use my HRTF, though, the audio reaches a higher level of realism, which is to say that when using headphones and my HRTF, I occasionally get fooled and even think a sound is coming from the real world when it's actually coming from the
That's gonna fuck with me so hard on my nice headphones.
A corollary to this is that there are a few people whose HRTFs are sufficiently far from the default HRTF, that's the red dot here, that they can toggle between PS4 style and PS5 style audio and not sense much difference. I've had a few people describe the PlayStation 5's 3D audio as sounding like a bit better stereo audio. Presumably they're the ones at the very edges of this diagram. Which means what HRTF you're using is key. I'd like everyone to be able to experience what I'm experiencing, but obviously it's not possible to measure the HRTF of every PlayStation user. That means HRTF selection and synthesis are going to be big topics going forward as the Tempest technology matures. At PlayStation 5 launch, we'll be offering a choice of 5 HRTFs.
Nice. That was exactly what I was thinking.
That gives you the best locality. That's just the first step, though. This is an open-ended research topic.
This is insane.
Maybe
I
you'll be
love
sending
this.
us a photo
This
of
is
your
fucking
ear, and
crazy.
we'll choose a neural network to pick the closest HRTF in our library. Maybe you'll be sending us a video of your ears and your head, and we'll make a 3D model of them and synthesize the HRTF. Maybe you'll play an audio game to tune your HRTF. We'll be subtly changing it as you play and home in on the HRTF that gives you the highest score, meaning that it matches you the best. This is a journey we'll all be taking together over the next few years. Ultimately, we're committing to enabling everyone to experience that next level of realism.
No one would have believed me if I fucking
Hopefully,
said
I've been
that's
able
what
to
they
illustrate a
do.
bit about our design and decision-making process today, and why PlayStation 5
we're
has
done.
the feature set that it does. Now comes the fun part. We get to see how the development community takes advantage of that feature set. I'm hoping for the completely unexpected. Will it come from audio, ray tracing, the capabilities of the SSD, or something else? I guess we'll find out soon enough. Thank you for your time today.
I mean, I didn't expect any games. I expected at most one. I expected a bit more benchmarks. I love how many people are shocked that this thing that was a GDC panel didn't have games. Anyways, we're going to head on over to twitter.com. Check out.
Wow, there it is, guys. Interesting.
So, I heard he has specs. No? I'm not seeing... Oh, Digital Foundry. Richard Ledbetter. No thanks, I'll keep. I use YouTube Red to compensate them. I back them on Patreon. I'm good with ad blocking Eurogamer. Sorry, Eurogamer. Let's see. Nothing here. This is interesting. That's interesting too. Is it because of the clock rate? Because the Xbox actually has... The Xbox actually has a lower clock because, as they were saying there, you know, you could have more CUs, but then they wouldn't be properly utilized. So having fewer and clocking them higher makes more sense. That's really interesting, though. So we're talking of a difference of 1.8 gigahertz and 2.23 gigahertz here, which is somewhere around 25% higher clock. But as a part of that, I guess, the memory interface is going faster because I could have sworn Microsoft said they were using a higher bit memory interface, a wider bus. I'm glad they acknowledged the same thing as Microsoft. You know, you can use USB hard drives for the storing of PS4 games and playing the PS4 games off of that. And you can store your games on that and bring it back to the PS5. And you can bring your PS4 games over to your PS5's internal drive in order to play it faster. But this custom SSD thing is really complicated. I'm glad, though, that it's left to consumers to buy an approved checklist of SSDs to stick in their system because... Wait a second. Wait a second. Are you guys fucking seeing this? The raw speed on this is 5.5? Their raw speed is higher than Microsoft's compressed speed? Just so we're clear, the Xbox Series X raw throughput is only 2.4 gigabytes. That thing is over twice as fast on a raw front, which is important because while compression raises your bandwidth potentially, the speed it takes to take a bunch of small items isn't necessarily helped by hardware compression. And then with the compression, they're approaching twice as fast for compressed too. That's nuts. That's completely nuts. This is literally what people were talking about with the Microsoft shows an 8-second load time. Sony shows a 4. Like, Sony shows a 3-second load time. Load times basically wouldn't exist at that point because something people need to understand is when you get to a load screen, the first 2 to 3 seconds are amortized mentally. Like, you are just experiencing the stimulus of seeing the load screen. 8 seconds versus 4 seconds or 3 seconds feels a lot longer because you've had more time to adjust to the fact you're staring at a screen and waiting for shit to happen. I want to see Kingdom Hearts 3 on that fucking internal drive. But yeah, something really important for people to understand, I think over time it's going to end up being a cheaper solution to get one of these approved SSDs, since it is something available at retail from a third party. It's not proprietary, so they get economies of scale in there. I think that's going to eventually combat this to make it cheaper, which is great because I do not expect either to be cheap, period. Like, I don't expect them to be cheap in the least. Any questions from chat? Because damn, I honestly think that's really neat conceptually, that they're going for a very different approach. Like, less wide, more fast. Because they have 36 CUs, whereas Xbox Series X has 52. You know, that's almost 50. Like, compared the PS5 to the Xbox Series X, you have almost 50% more processing hardware at the GPU level in the Xbox Series X. But since it clocks higher, it sort of makes up the difference, and it ends up at 10.28 or 10.3, and then the Xbox Series X ends up at 12.155 or 12.2. So you're talking a difference of 1.9 teraflops, which relative to the PlayStation end of things, I guess that would make it about 16, 17%. I guess, you know what? It's close enough to 10. We'll just say it's 19% performance. And then the whole argument they're making here, the stance they've taken with the design of this platform is you're going to get much more efficiency out of clocking it high than you are building it wide. So you bet your ass when Sony said they're going to build some mean fucking cooling into this, that they meant it. Just the approach they said of, we are trying to hit constant maximum power, is telling. How did they kill PS4's patching? Okay, so when you patch a file on a normal OS, I don't think there's a currently existing device that does this. When you patch a file, you have the core file you got, and you get the patch from the internet. What the patch contains is the instructions of what to change in the data and the data to replace it with or change it with. So, like, say they updated Sora's model. So you would get the original game file, and then you would just have the instruction that this is Sora's new file, like his new model. You would have to tear apart the original game file, delete the part that is Sora, put in the new Sora, and then re-put it together. This new one, it just goes, here's Sora's new model, and it's an external file. Like, it just sits there. You don't need to install it because this SSD is so fucking fast that it in no way has to concern itself with where it locates that data. I mean, 9 gigabytes per second. Can you guys fucking understand that? That is fast. This isn't how it works, but like just a mental exercise to convey this. The PS5 has 16 gigs of RAM. How fast can you fill 16 gigs of RAM at 9 gigabytes a second? That's right, less than 2 seconds. That's fucking nice. This is fantastic. Straw Hat, the major things you missed. They talked about design philosophies of explaining why they made their system fewer CUs but higher clock. They explained how insane their 3D audio is, which has me fucking excited. They have a very custom hardware thing. They called it the Tempest engine. And they're using the Tempest engine to power their 3D audio solution, which uses an insane amount of technology through an insane amount of research they did in order to make people wearing headphones the most intensely immersive thing possible, with the future being making it work with TV speakers. That shit is going to be unreal. Like when they talk about hundreds of audio sources in the environment being processed through this very custom thing in order to sound exactly as it would sound to your ears. That's insane. It's going to be nuts. He did say something about the process of like you could do a facial scan, like say you had a PlayStation Eye or a PlayStation camera or something like that. Like it could do a facial scan to figure out the shape and size of your head in order to then build a custom HRTF. They were talking about that as a potential of what they could do, which makes sense somewhat that they could guesstimate based on that. That is nuts. They talked about, in order to explain how the Tempest engine works, they talked about making the CUs on the GPU operate like an SPU in a cell. And when he said that shit, I was like, you stop fucking with me, okay, man? Stop that. Stop making me think that you can turn this GPU into a cell processor. I don't need that in my life right now, okay? I don't need you going, hey, did you know we can make this a lot like the cell? Did you know? Did you know that? I don't need that. If you don't have announcements, I don't need that. There was also a lot of detail. What exactly is 3D audio? Okay, so what you don't understand is that when you play a video game, what you would like to think happens in the video game is that the monster makes a sound, and in the 3D space, the monster made the sound right there. But that's actually not really how it works. It's actually a lot more simplistic and cheated than that. Like, that monster is not making a sound in 3D space. That monster is making a sound, and then it's approximated where in stereo that sound would be. Or if you have surround sound, it's approximated where in surround sound that would be. 3D audio means when you put on, it's easiest to explain as headphones. When you put on headphones, the way you're looking in the game, the full fucking 3D audio around you will be simulated for hitting your exact ears. You know? So instead of it being stereo-wise, as he explained in Dead Space, you hear an enemy on the right and you can't see it. You assume it's behind you and to the right. Like in front of you and to the right and behind you and to the right don't have that significant of a difference to how stereo audio sounds, generally speaking. 3D audio means because your ear is constructed in such a way that sound behind you sounds different from sound in front of you and things like that, you would be able to tell he was behind you and to the right. Like, you would be able to feel that. It's not, oh, I can guess based on it. It would sound like it's there. Will this be useless for people with a cheap headset? How cheap? I mean, you don't need a headset. You just need even halfway decent pair of headphones, and this should make a pretty substantial difference. For me, I'm going to lose my mind, so that's cool. What else? Yeah, they said the top 100 games will be... Oh, no. You misunderstood, RE-Cell. We need to get out ahead of this right now. What they said was unlocking the full power of the PS5 for PS4 games has been tested on the top 100 games, and they work just fine. See, on Microsoft's side, they virtualize the hardware. They don't have to test that. They don't have to have a checklist of like, oh, this game doesn't shit its pants, give it a thumbs up. Sony doesn't virtualize hardware, which is part of why they had a performance advantage this last gen. Long term, it worked out for Microsoft from a backwards compatibility front. But Sony, basically, what you'll be able to do at launch is run every PS4 game at a base PS4 or a Pro PS4 mode. And then if it's ratified as being okay, you can run it in full unlocked big dick PS5 processing power. You're going to get the solid state drive benefits with all of it, which I cannot stress how fucking insane 8 to 9 gigabytes per second is. Shit. Oh, Nibel's already Nibelians. Great. Awesome. Well, aren't you all glad to be here, tuned into Dan, who can listen and understands tech? Urameshi, in order to make Bloodborne 60 frames per second, it would have to have an uncapped frame rate, which it doesn't, as far as I know. Monster Hunter, I think, does have an uncapped frame rate, so it could. in theory. I'm super glad to be able to explain this to you. I feel like I owe the people of the Rant is Go where I explain the technology announcements here and the scale of fucking 89 gigabytes. Between that and the 3D audio, this is actually very exciting. And I find their concept of fewer CUs running at a much higher speed very interesting. Man. Will you make a thread about this soon? You mean on Twitter? I feel like I'm better. I always find it hard to express myself and explain things on Twitter. Maybe that's because Twitter's the #1 place where I see people reply who don't understand what I said, but that's how I feel. Man. Okay, what's the faster speed for Microsoft's RAM? Okay, it looks like for those who paid attention, the Xbox Series X has 2 different speeds of RAM. It has GPU optimal at 560 gigabytes per second and GPU standard at 336. Sony's comes in a little bit between those, closer to the high-speed RAM. So theirs is 448 gigabytes per second, which puts it way closer to the... Let me do some quick math. No, that puts it perfectly in the middle. That puts it perfectly in the middle between the 2 different speeds Microsoft has. I still find that concept of the Microsoft having its one memory pool, but part of it runs slower than the other part, very strange. I'm not even saying, oh, that's gonna ruin everything. It's just a weird thing, and I'm sure that, game devs survived ESRAM on the Xbox One. I'm sure they'll survive this just fine. Dan, as the backwards compatibility with the PS3, PS2, PS1 confirmed later on, how do you think those games will be affected based off of what we know about the PS5? PS1 and PS2 compat should 100% be possible on this thing. The only thing up in the air is the PS3. I'm very excited for them to fucking announce anything on that front, but they're not interested. Honestly, Urameshi, like, fucking, yeah, this thing's gonna bust Kingdom Hearts ass wide open on fucking load times. That's very exciting. How will this be, how exactly will this allow video games developers to make better games? So as he said, it's easier to get your engine up and running on the PS5 than ever, which is what every developer has said. Every developer's out there saying the PS5 is the easiest to develop for platform out there, which makes sense when the Microsoft one apparently has a weird memory thing. Like, that's bizarre to me. It has an insanely fast SSD, so you can do more ambitious things. Like, it is so hard to explain how much thought and effort goes in from game developers on trying to make sure a game can run off the slow hard drives in current systems. Like, I guess you could compare it, like, if you wanted to slow it down mentally, if you wanted to really abstract this out, you could compare it to reading off a tape, right? Like a VHS. So it's reading off of this part of the tape, and some of the data is later, so it's got to speed up the drive and scan it across. It's fast forwarding, and then it gets there and it reads that, and then it's got to go back, and then it's going to read that. This fixes all of that, and the Microsoft thing does too. It's certainly fast. It's 4.8 gigabytes per second compressed, but this is nuts. This is unhinged. Sorry, let me get a drink of water real quick, because I'm heating up. There's a reason it's the #1 thing developers ask for. Every time you've ever crawled through a crack in a video game, every time you've ever had to slowly push a box, every time you've had to do the walk and talk, every time was because of hard drives. Every last time. No one actually wanted to put that in their game. It was just a smart way to slow the player down while they loaded in stuff. The part where they talk about custom hardware they made to make memory management even more efficient is nuts. And the fact that they talk about it like it's an automated thing, that their system level flash controller is communicating directly with the GPU on some custom hardware Sony made on that end to make sure that they communicate what has changed in the memory, is really intense. And I think that's more interesting and easier to deal with than the direct store API that Microsoft's talking about. Because when Microsoft talks about their concept of your game's extended virtual memory can reside on the SSD, and you know, you only need this much of it, so you can leave the rest on the SSD. They talk about using the direct store API, and I think this is going to be a lot more automated, a lot more simple, which seems to be their goal. I feel like Sony learned a whole hell of a lot with the, hey, did you notice if we clock things higher, we get guaranteed gains? If we build things wider, there's an inefficiency there. In fact, that was one of the larger changes between the GCN architecture, which is what's in the PS4. That's what happens when my screen turns on, by the way. It's pure white, so it's blinding me because I moved the mouse, and that was enough for it to notice. That's the core difference between the GCN and the RDNA 2 architectures. Is the GCN, they built it wider. The RDNA, they built it able to assess and compute more frequently, so twice as often. So you would get penalized less for missing an execution window. You know, it was less likely you would miss an execution window. He calculated some strange value like 825 gigabytes with no other mention of size variance, so console revisions might be limited. I'm sure it's going to be something like that. You know, this is why they're letting people buy external from an approved list. I'm sure that... How hard is 825 gigabytes going to be to deal with? That's complicated. I'm fucking thrilled over never installing a patch again. Jesus Christ. Like, shit, man. No, Straw Hat. It is not out yet. It's not going to be ready in time for launch, is the way they made it sound, or it will be incomplete at launch. They will fill it out more as time goes on. So launch period is going to be a thing. Here's the thing, Aroc. 100 gigabyte games are not uncommon. But as we go into the PS5, these same games could potentially take up less space. As he mentioned, certain things like mailboxes in Spider-Man on the PS4 are duplicated 600 times across the disc. There's a lot of things like that you can avoid making your data redundant because you have a solid state drive, you know? Talking more about like what you can change. Okay, let me get water. Let me get water. I'm thirsty. I'm sweating. Okay, so there are so many things you don't understand are like your pause menu takes a moment to let you do things because it's not ready. Your vehicle change or other customizations take time to load up a menu because it needs time. It needs time. I mean, Super Smash Brothers, you get to the fighter select screen, the Switch CPU isn't even upclocked anymore to help it with the loading, so character skins aren't loaded. If you try to change your color, it just shows you nothing and it doesn't let you select the character. DLC fighters often take a moment to load in. There are things like that. I mean, as he was explaining it, the design of the Spider-Man city is so strict and regimented in how it's done because they need to know which city block you're heading towards, and it needs to have a very specific structure. Like, there's a really good postmortem from the people over at Insomniac talking about how they designed that city and how they loaded in and how much effort went into prioritizing different levels of data on each city block so that way you couldn't get there fast enough. And Spider-Man's travel speed is limited because you cannot go faster. Fucking Mark here, he's talking about like you can load things so fast that you could just say I can't see what's to my right now, right? My field of view is so low that I can't see right here. In the moment I hit the stick to the right, in this 30th of a second between here and here as I turn, you could load the whole fucking bookshelf. You know? It's things like that where it's just like you don't have to worry about taking the character from indoors to outdoors. You don't have to worry about stuff like that nearly as much anymore. When that was a huge thing before. You know, you wouldn't design a house in a video game to have that many windows for you to see an entire city outside because you want to be able to block line of sight. You want to make sure it's very restricted what they can see. So they can only get so close to the window so they can only see so much of what's outside. Mr. Biocross, I'm going to try my best to explain. A hard drive has a thing on it. It's a disk. It spins, and there's a needle on it that reads the data. All of this is encased in a block. In fact, you know what? Here. This is a hard drive. Inside of this, there are platters with magnetic data on them that spin, and there is a little needle that travels across to read it. If some of the data is on this end of a hard drive, the needle has to move out to there and it has to read that. And that takes time. That's serious time for a video game. Video games are incredibly high-speed things. That takes time. Okay? This is a solid-state drive. Now, solid-state drives, they're more like SD cards, but they're incredibly fast. They're, say, an SD card at RAM speeds. You just issue the command to read from a specific memory bank, and all that happens is the electron goes and checks what is in that, so what's stored in that bank. It doesn't matter how you arrange the data on this for all intents and purposes, because it can go to any of the memory banks in any order, and the penalty is incredibly low. It basically doesn't exist in comparison. The hard drive, you want it to load something here and then there? One fucking moment, man. This is going to take a bit. So that's why when you fast travel in a video game, you got to sit your ass down and wait. Well, not only do they have more efficient, like you guys, you know, as he was saying, it has at a hardware level, like the motherboard, you know, the PS5 itself. Don't even think about the storage. PS5 itself has a more efficient way of compressing the data, because all the data on these games nowadays are actually compressed, but it has an even more efficient one. So something that would say 100 gigs on the PS4, when stored on the PS5, it's 90. That was literally what he said during the talk. You know, he said 10 and 9 gigs, but you just throw an extra 0 at the end. So not only is there that, but say that game was designed from the ground up. You don't have to store 600 duplicate datas of mailboxes. You can store one, and it can just reference it. Like, it's that simple. You get to remove the data that you formerly made redundant to make it easier on the game to run, and you could just focus on storing individual assets to be used in various spots. It is helpful, incredibly helpful. So in two different ways, it's helping this. I like the concept. You know, honestly, thank you for asking that question, because it wasn't until you asked that question that I thought about, yeah, even the PS4 games will be stored using that compression, as far as I'm to understand it. So games from the PS4 will take up less space on the PS5, even if they're the same games. And that's pretty cool to me. What else? Quigsy's that State of Decay 2 load time trailer. I think the improvement from 35 seconds to 8 seconds is important. I think being able to resume your games in 6.2 seconds is important. But you know what's cooler than being a millionaire? Is being a billionaire. So, yeah, 8.5 seconds is real fucking cool. You know what's cooler? 4 or 3. That is way fucking cooler. Oh, God. It really is that different because, as I said before, the hardware compression on the PS5's motherboard and the Xbox Series X is really cool. But there are certain things about reading different data because, you know, not everything you're reading is a large file. A lot of things you're reading could be small data sets, you know, not even textures or graphics. It could be information, just normal 3D space information or whatever. The faster the SSD's raw speed, the better for something like that, because that means you're going to be able to pull that thing, that tiny little bit of data, and move on immediately. The more you rely on this hardware compression, the less you benefit things like that. So having a raw speed that is over 2 times as fast is really impactful. On big thing to mention, you mentioned UE devs loading certain assets into memory based on what is most to least needed. Do you think good programming practices will be less used since everything is so fast? Devs won't care to optimize. I'm going to be honest. I think Housemarque's the only people doing that. Maybe the people who made Days Gone did that. I don't know. But I bet I would put money on the fact that Kingdom Hearts 3 doesn't do that in the least. Kingdom Hearts 3 is the exact example that Housemarque's talking about, where it's like, you're loading into a level, you're still waiting to load because it needs to know the texture on the bullet in the gun that the soldier is holding on the other side of the map that you will not see for minutes. Like, that's what we're talking about. Meanwhile, so when we talk about like good practices, bad practices, do I think better hardware is going to make game developers lazier? Maybe, but will it matter? You know, like he's talking about, making something 10 times faster is cool. Making the drive 100 times faster at every step of the stack is more important. And I'm really glad that they're putting that much attention to it, because just having a really fast drive is not the same as having the system built from the ground up to go insanely fast. They're absolutely going to murder load screens with this. Like, having a game that takes forever to load, I don't think will be based on how data is arranged or compressed or whatever. Now, I honestly don't know what it'll be based on. Obviously, in an online game, it'll still have to make sure that all the players loaded everything, because Smash Brothers takes more time to load online than it does offline for that exact reason. It needs to make sure every player's loaded. It's not just, I'm loaded, let's go. Fuck those other guys. No, you have to check that everyone's good. I do have tech videos on GigaBoots, but they're pretty old. So, you know, like, solid state drives weren't nearly as prolific back when I did those. Umbra, that is a really interesting question. Is this a bigger leap from the PS4 to PS5 than PS2 to PS3? It's complicated, because graphics have matured in a way where when you went from the PS2 to the PS3, you know, they invented pixel shaders. So, like, lighting itself drastically changed. Did it take forever for it to look good? Yes, because everyone was doing a hideous color grade and skin didn't look right. You know, this gen, we've already had such amazing looking games. When you look at Sony exclusives especially, they just look ridiculously pretty. You know, you see the cutscenes in Death Stranding. Nobody's sitting there being like, this looks like ass, can't wait for next gen. Like, that stuff looks unreal. So, in a sense, it's not the same. But there was a cost of going from the PS2 to the PS3 that isn't talked about enough. You know, doing that evolution from the PS2's like 3 processors, because there's a main MIPS and then there's 2 vector units. And, the vector units weren't essential to get your game up and running, but it would certainly make it run unbelievably better if you knew how to code the assembly for the vector units. Like, going from that to the cell processor and even the Xenon to some extent, multi-threading was so integral to get games up and running, and then you had memory coherency and all this stuff. There was a reason why developers at the beginning of that generation said, we're never going to try to hit 60 frames per second again. Like, we're just worried about 30. Because getting everything on the same page 60 times a second was that hard that gen. You could barely get any work done. This gen leap from from the PS4 to the PS5, that is the beautiful thing about it. We're talking about CPU cores that are somewhere between 4 or 5 times as powerful, and there are just as many cores. The same code will run on this way better. We're obliterating load times. Like, guys, I cannot speak passionately enough about this fucking SSD. We have, many of you haven't even been alive for when cartridge games were new. I'm not talking your DS carts, which, that's its own thing. I'm talking like Super NES. Back then, you would hit the power button, a game would be going. You have been living your entire lives with load times as a mandatory, as a part of the thing. To escape that, after PS1, PS2, PS3, and PS4, 4 generations of gaming, spanning across 24 years. Well, actually, it's 2026, because it launched in 94 in Japan. It's incredible! Like, that's huge! Like, just imagine you want to play some fighting game with your friends. You go to boot that, and that thing will be up and running so fast. It's ludicrous. Like, I cannot not express that. I can't. It's so, yeah, see, and that's the thing, Tekken. Absolutely. I'm so excited for fighting game load times. Like it's so hard. I mean, Street Fighter V just takes fucking forever to boot. Like, the load times are really bad. I hate how flashy it is because it's covering for that. Like, if you recall, at the launch of Street Fighter V, they did a dumb face and then they just stood there and nothing happened until it was fully loaded the match. Later, they changed it to have all these camera cuts and look cool. And that's great. That's cool. But we don't need that anymore. Which is why, like, having bespoke PS5 versions of games is helpful. Because on the PS4, it's going to be like, okay, we're loading. We're doing these flashy camera cuts. We could already be in game. After 2 of these cuts, we could already be playing the game that you're here to play. But instead, we're going to keep doing these camera cuts and showing animation of them staring at each other and then cut to the still image. And then once we get there, we go, oh, we're done. What the fuck have we been doing for like seconds now? What else? Okay. I cannot stress how excited I am. Let me put it this way. If I was gaming on the PS5, I would have probably finished Platinum in Kingdom Hearts 3 a day sooner. That is how much load times suck. How did you feel about the PS4 when it was revealed at E3 all those years ago? It wasn't revealed at E3. It was revealed at the February thing, and I was incredibly excited because I spent an entire generation living under the shadow of the cell processor. You know, third-party ports, very difficult. Things like that. The OS, not very functional, not very responsive. I like the design of the PS3 OS. But yeah. Dan, do you think we'll have to wait until June to see next-gen game? I think we're getting it before June. I assume May. I assume if not April, then May. Mukbun, I do not doubt that the Xbox Series X will, in some cases, run games better. Like, I'm sure you can't have 10%. Like, and here's the problem, right? Like, if these numbers are a little off, I apologize. But as I recall it, the PS4... You know what? Let's just Google it. We're going to go to Google. My Google not work, what do? So... As I recall, the performance delta between the PS4, we're going to type in gigaflops and sure, we'll do Tech Radar. Why not? I do mind. I really just want to get this number. Okay, so the original PS4 is 1.8. And the Xbox One was about 1.4, 1.3. The difference there is approaching something like 50%, 40%. Let's say between 30 and 40%, right? And that was the difference between 1080p and 900p or 1080p and 720p. That is 3 to 4 times the performance delta that we're talking about between... You know, let's say 3. We'll just say 3. That's 3 times the performance delta we're saying between the PS5 and the Xbox Series X. I don't know that we're going to see that huge of a difference even. Which is nuts, right? Like, why would... I don't think that we're going to see a game on Xbox Series X that is full 4K 60. And then that game is going to be markedly lower resolution on the PS5. You know? I don't think we're going to see that game that's like, oh, I'm 1600p. Because that doesn't make sense. 1600p is a radically lower resolution. That's not 10%. And once again, this 10% performance buff is on paper. It's teraflops. Like, as I've said multiple times, teraflops, gigaflops, these are important measurements, but context is what powers that. I had an argument with a guy on Twitter earlier today. He was combining the gigaflops of the GPU and the CPU in the PS3, and then only acknowledging the gigaflops in the GPU of the 360. And this is what he was comparing. And I'm like, you can't abstract it like that. That's not really how that works. Morgan, this is the same shit that happened the last time Sony did this. Anyone who pays attention to history would have known that if they showed a game, it would have been to show off some tech. Like, we might have seen the same Spider-Man benchmark from last year. You know? Like, also, how can you... How the fuck can you complain the PS5 isn't showing off new games when the Xbox Series X isn't launching with new games? When they already have a policy of not having exclusive next-gen experiences for their box, how can you explain that Sony's GDC panel doesn't have such a thing? That's fucking stupid. And I understand, you know, people need to see the load times in order to understand the gulf we're talking about here, how radically it'll improve it. And a dude coming out on stage and, you know, he did a great job of explaining things. But I don't think people are functioning on that level that they're going to be able to understand that. You know, people are already talking about like, oh, this conference sucked. They didn't talk about the important things. Let's see. Someone in chat asked, now the most important question. On a scale of 1 to 10, how much is Stadia shitting itself right now? If the people at Google are not panicking and throwing money in the fucking fire right now, it's dead. There's when I, like, you can go and watch the Stadia stream. I shit a lot on the fucking load times. Like, it's a server blade. It's a fucking server blade. Why am I waiting for this to load? That's why. You think the PS5's gonna take that long to load Destiny or Sam Show? The fucking Stadia is a fucking joke. There really wasn't a whole lot of VR info. You know, they were just talking about a thing I already own. I own the PSVR. I bought it on Black Friday. It was worth it at that price. Missed most of the stream, but they didn't talk about top 100 PS4 games are compatible. MSD, this is the most important shit in the world. That is not what they said. They said unlocking the full power of the PS5 for PS4 games has only been certified for the top 100 games. And that they are going to continue checking games out to make sure they're compatible. Every game will run on the PS5. It's a PS4 game. Please, and I'm not saying this to be mean, but please do your best to tell everyone who's illiterate that. Because I see a lot of people on Twitter right now. They're out there on Twitter right now telling everyone the PS5 only plays 100 PS4 games because they can't listen. Yeah, I heard Nibelians out there saying that, and that's a fucking shame. I would expect better, to be honest. Imagine Bloodstained running on the PS5. I've been doing that since it launched. I'm so fucking excited. So fucking excited. Oh yeah. If Final Fantasy 15 has an unlocked frame rate, which I'm pretty sure it does, yeah, that shit would hit 60. I'm pretty fucking sure. Let's see. I expect a lot of games will need micro patches for certain nuanced things. I mean, what they're talking about, Soul, is that to just let the code as it is run on the PS5 has already worked for the top 100 games. Those games don't need a patch. Would a patch help? Absolutely. You know, I was talking about earlier. Yeah, you know what? I'll go ahead and undo the mute on the notification sounds. Thank you very much for subscribing. I appreciate it. You know, doing a stream like this is fun as hell, and I'm enjoying it immensely. So I appreciate any of the support we could get for that. Yes, Urameshi, that's the concept. Thanks, Casey. Thank you. But yeah, as I was saying with Street Fighter V, like, you play the same version of Street Fighter V on your PS5, it's going to sit there showing you an ad for the Fighter Pass to cover a load time that doesn't exist. So you would need to patch it in order to figure that out. I expect Tekken 7 to just not give a shit because it's Unreal Engine. The funniest thing about all of this is all the people, the games that show the greatest benefit from running unlocked full potential PS5 mode is every game that just is fucking not incredibly polished, you know? Your Kingdom Hearts is now 4K 60. Your Kingdom Hearts now loads insanely faster. You know, it's things like that. Your God of War already locked this frame rate. Your God of War's world was already designed to not have load times or camera cuts. That doesn't change on a PS5. Would they add a high quality mode where there's a full 4K 60? Yeah, you would have to patch it to get that on God of War, because that game doesn't. Actually, it might have a dynamic resolution. Yeah, I think it does. Shit games become better. Nice. See? And that's what matters. Of course, the Xbox Series X is always also going to do the same thing. In fact, it doesn't need to have a certified list. It just works because they virtualize the hardware. Let's see. Thank you for the follow. We talk about a lot of tech here, so I always appreciate it. We do a lot of live streams. Every live stream, I'm always willing to talk about that. Oh!
Thanks clearing this all up for us. Your explanations have been easier to understand.
Oh, well, I'm glad. Incomprehensible hour-long lecture video. Jason Schreier, you tech-illiterate fuck. Maybe this wasn't for you. Maybe a bad marketing move is when you announce that your fucking new console has no experiences that couldn't be done on the last console. God, Jason Schreier's such a fucking idiot. I'll signal boost him in as much to fucking slam him. He's such a thin-skinned little bitch. I retweeted someone making fun of him once and he blocked me. And I'm not talking maliciously making fun of him. They screen capped some shit he said that was repugnant. God. Dan Tech Gamers. Yeah, anyway. How many modern TVs actually support above 60 hertz? Actually a lot, Eric. A shocking amount. I didn't expect that revolution to happen in the TV display space, but most TVs now support that. Like if you're talking going out and buying an actually new TV, even some of the cheaper brands support higher frame rates, which is cool shit. As I understand it, what I expect to see is that when you run a game at 120 hertz, it'll actually have, like, let me rephrase this. Say you have Kingdom Hearts, okay? Kingdom Hearts 3, let's say there's an internal thing to cap it at 60 frames per second, so there's no way it'll run at 120. Would it be great if it did, though? But I don't know. Let's say it's capped at 60. If you set your system up at 120 hertz, it should actually reduce the input latency on Kingdom Hearts 3 because it would be checking for the frame to be drawn twice as often. Now, there's some weird shenanigans on Microsoft's front with how they do that, and Digital Foundry has an interesting video where they look at that. There's a reason I back them. They're incredibly informative and super helpful and a positive influence on the gaming community. Sora clips at 120 hertz. Yeah, he goes through the floor. Let's see. I'm probably going to get blocked for telling him it was supposed to be a GDC talk. Yeah. Solambron, look up Digital Foundry's video. It's super interesting how it works because I don't remember the name of the video, and I'm really sorry that I don't remember the name, but they were talking about you could have a game that ran at above 60 hertz on the Xbox One X, like they found it. But then you could have a game that ran at, say, 45 frames per second with VSync disabled. When you set it to 120 hertz mode, weirdly enough, it engages a VSync at 120 hertz mode. So it actually, in theory, has more input lag than if you left it at the original thing. It's so weird. It's so weird. But yeah, no, any more questions? I'm loving talking about this. I'm kind of shocked it's not a 1 terabyte hard drive. I'm not shocked because SSDs do come in weird numbers a lot of the time, and given the very custom things they're doing with their SSD, it makes sense that theirs would be. It is a damn shame it's below 1 terabyte. For me, at the end of the day, the difference between 720p and 1080p is pretty fucking radical. The difference between 900p and 1080p is substantial. I've actually seen it myself because I have a PS4 Vanilla. Bob has a PS4 Pro. If I'm not mistaken, that's the divide on Soul Calibur 6, and it looks blurry on my PS4 Pro. It looks pretty nice on it looks blurry on my PS4 Vanilla. It looks pretty sharp on his PS4 Pro. The difference between 900p, 1080p, pretty important. But once you have games targeting 4K, and the performance difference on paper is about 10%, 15%. I don't know how much that's going to matter to even me. And I I am fucking blessed with this channel to have enough support in my life to own an OLED TV. Like, I have a 4K fucking OLED, and it should do 120 hertz. And even to me, an on-paper 15% difference in performance does not matter nearly as much as an insanely faster SSD. I have to wonder how much of the 3D audio stuff Microsoft's also going to have. You can punch it too. I mean, I could, but I won't. Nitro, I disagree. As someone who played through all of Kingdom Hearts 2 in 1080p on this 4K TV from pretty close, and then looked across the room the next day to a dude playing it in 4K, proper 4K, and this is Kingdom Hearts 2, the difference was staggering. It looks so much smoother and nicer. The thing is, you don't realize, when all these people say you can't tell the difference between 1080p and 4K unless blah, they're talking about movies that aren't in 4K, upscaled to 4K. They're talking about TVs that aren't necessarily sharp enough to show the difference, that don't have enough local contrast in order to actually define the pixels enough to show that. People constantly make shit up. You know, there are lots of people who have said, you know, the human eye can't see more than 30 frames, 24 frames per second, and that's bullshit. You know? Don't pay attention to people who tell you the limits of human capacity. Because by and large, it's just a bullshit number. It's like Mythbusters. It's like when a thing happens and people decide this is what we discovered, and we're not going to rigorously test this to be sure we're right. See? Your man KZ Excellent is telling you. He's right there. He's right there telling you 4K looks so nice. Yes. Showing 4 times as much data on a screen is daunting. I'm curious how many devs are going to take advantage of custom solutions to 3D audio and SSD. They don't have to worry about the SSD. The SSD is super automated. You know, they're not programming the flash controllers. Sony did all the work to make this incredibly custom thing themselves. The 3D audio is interesting. Dude, I can tell you in a fucking heartbeat from across the room if a display is 120 hertz and 60, and anyone who's seen that in person would tell you that is how that is. For one, I can move... If I were to set this to 120 hertz and move a window, if somebody else were to set it to 120 hertz and move the window, I would notice instantly. That shit is apparent. And I'm really excited for Gran Turismo. The Gran Turismo devs over at Polyphony Digital actually said they're more interested in raising the frame rate next gen rather than the fidelity. And that's cool as hell. Absolutely, Ninja. Absolutely, Ninja Gregory. 100%. This was about getting people to develop new games. It was not about a back compat initiative. This wasn't a marketing thing as much as it was a letting everyone know about their platform and being open about it and explaining it for game devs. Is it also marketing? Of course. Of course, it also functions as marketing. Once again, I apologize for the cough. I'm just getting over my cold. Thank God I got over it in time for this. Oh, man, that would have sucked. Could you imagine me in bed watching this video and being like, that's cool. There's a lot of cool information. Going over to Twitter and seeing everyone go, it doesn't play PS4 games. Do you think we can guesstimate the price? I still think it's 500 or 400. I can't. If it's 400. If it's 400. If it's $400. Oh man, if it's $400, that's the equivalent of the chainsaw kill from Gears of War to Microsoft. Because not only do they have like exclusive games, and a lot of them, I guarantee, they have a more performant console in a lot of ways. And If it's 400, Microsoft's coming out at 5 or 6. And Microsoft only has... Yeah, the cost of the parts is $450. And it would not be the first time ever. It would not be the first time ever that a company has lost that much money on a console. In fact, that used to be the norm. Sony would basically cast Microsoft into the dead zone at $400. Because that's the thing. The cost of consoles goes down radically over the first year. And by the cost, I mean the cost of producing. If it was $300, I'm sure people would buy it. If it was $300, it would start convincing people it was less powerful. I think they would buy more into Sony's statement. This is interesting. Things got a whole lot more interesting with them talking about this. The divide between the two consoles is interesting in so many ways. I do wonder how much of that 3D audio tech is over at Microsoft, because it's clear Sony firsthand did a lot of analysis themselves. On the 3D audio. Were you sufficiently surprised? There were a couple things that got me. No, Straw Hat. This is a very simple system. Like they already talked about, it's even easier to develop for this system than it was the PS4. And that's the thing we've been hearing from game devs for months now, that it's the easiest game hardware to make a game on ever. And that's exciting as hell. Like, that's unreal. I'm not that surprised. I think Sony just wants to save some things for later. Yes, Woot. The gap, the chasm between what the Switch is capable of and what these consoles are capable of is radical. Because, we're talking 11 or 10 teraflops. We're talking 12 teraflops. The Switch isn't even one. We're talking 8 cores at fucking 3.5 and 3.6 gigahertz, which, yeah, that's also worth noting that the CPU in the PS5 is 0.1 gigahertz slower. That's interesting. Like, they're very close. The Switch really isn't that strong. Every company that does these amazing ports from the PS4, they're doing God's work. They're doing miracles to get that done. That is not easy. Not every developer can port like that. And Digital Foundry actually did a video relatively recently where you can hack the Switch and install a metrics thing, like a performance statistics software on it, where it'll tell you what each CPU core is running at, utilization-wise, and the GPU and the RAM speed. You see Doom on that? You see Wolfenstein on that? It is firing on every cylinder as hard as it can. And then you go see Breath of the Wild. And then you go see some other third-party game. And it's... those people are doing amazing work getting those PS4 games over on the Switch. Well, I'm glad Wario64 has a fucking clue. Now, after everyone corrected him, I assume, based on how that tweet's phrased. Jesus fucking Christ. I'm really glad that Sony's doing the work to make sure that these games can go sicko mode on the PS5 because, guys, that was something I was legitimately concerned about. That is something I wasn't sure was going to happen because, as I said, Microsoft virtualizes the hardware. Microsoft virtualizes it, which gives it a layer between the game and the hardware. So the hardware can change and the game can just run on it and not be knowledgeable of what's going on. Sony does not virtualize the hardware like Microsoft does, so it's a bit more tricky. But, you know, did Death Stranding have performance issues? I'm on a PS4 vanilla. Death Stranding runs at 20 frames per second. Death Stranding is going to run a shitload better on the PS5, I am sure. I'm curious what you're talking about, Mystery Man. I'm not quite sure what the context of what you're saying is, so I can't understand your statement. Let's see. How long before Bethesda steals PC mods to update? Oh God, that's terrible. I don't want to think about that. The Switch specs. Yeah, it's that. Yeah. Also, it's an NVIDIA solution, so they have to use NVIDIA CPUs and NVIDIA other things. Even if it was, you know, like the Shield console, a dedicated console, it still could not be a PS4 or whatever, let alone a PS5. Yeah, man, this is really interesting. That's really interesting. But yeah, I think it's cool that they're talking about the custom decompressor they made is equivalent to like 9 Zen 2 cores because it's that hard to compress and decompress that level of data. I think the scrubbers they're talking about that live on the GPU and make the SSD transfers that much more coherent is interesting as hell. And that sounded like a Sony custom thing. That didn't sound like Microsoft would also have that. So you have to wonder if they're going to have better utilization of the RAM then, because that isn't something the developer has to handle at all. Meanwhile, Microsoft's advertising their things using the Direct Store API. So who knows? Either way, thank you all for joining me. I'm gonna shut down the stream because much like that person in chat, I too have to use the restroom. Would you recommend a PS5 over a PC? Yes, because it's drastically cheaper. I would do that. I would recommend if you were on the edge thinking about upgrading a PC right now, I would wait till the PS5 comes out just so you can see $400, $500 versus... Because what they were talking about with the Xbox Series X is that the performance is equivalent to an RTX 2080. That is a $750 graphics card, and the use case wasn't even highly optimized for the Xbox Series X. I think that's a great value because it's not just a GPU. It's everything else you put in a PC combined. Anyways, you all have a great day. See you later.